I'm going to talk about either the greatest or the worst game of Call of Cthulhu I ever experienced. Here's what happened. Greg Stafford was my boss at the time. This was in the late 1980s, and he was the president of Chaosium. He served as president of Chaosium from the founding until the mid-90s when he was ousted in a coup d'etat. So Greg says, I want to run a Call of Cthulhu game. It was at a convention, I think Gen Con, but I won't swear to it. It could have been Origins. Anyway, he wanted to run a game in his hotel room. And so the players were going to be me, who you know, the author of Call of Cthulhu, and Greg's going to run a game. I don't get to play as a player in Call of Cthulhu very much, because whenever anyone wants to do Call of Cthulhu and I'm around, they always like, oh, Sandy, you should run it because you know how to do the game. So, you know, it is what it is. So one of the players was Ken Ralston. Now, Ken Ralston was a designer, and he may be one of the greatest designers you probably haven't heard of. Greg Kostikin wrote the game Paranoia, and he had the idea for it, but he had kind of bare bones text of like the concept, and that was great, don't get me wrong. But it was Ken Ralston that turned Paranoia from what Greg had written into the amazing dialogue and look and feel, and it like made Paranoia super fun and entertaining. He made it a hit, really. He also later on went into video games, and he was the chief designer and storyteller for Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind and Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. So he's quite an amazing guy. And Ken and Greg and all of us were good friends. We still are. Well, Greg passed away. So, you know, a couple years ago, but Ken and I are still friends. And one of the early things Ken did was a product for our failed superhero game, and the product was called Bad Medicine for Dr. Drugs. And Bad Medicine for Dr. Drugs was about high school superheroes, and of course Dr. Drugs was selling drugs. And it was a little thin scenario, and its sales were astonishingly bad. It was a complete flop. So what Greg started doing at this convention, it was a Gen Con, is he was handing out copies of Bad Medicine for Dr. Drugs to people for free. If they came to our booth and they bought anything, they got a free copy of Bad Medicine for Dr. Drugs. And so that got us some extra sales, and we got rid of the bad medicines, which was fine. So people were doing this. So Ken walks up, and Ken has not heard anything about how Bad Medicine is done. He said, so how's Bad Medicine Dr. Drugs doing? And Greg said, it's doing great. And he goes, it is? Because Ken wasn't sure about it. And Greg stood up on a chair, and he shouted out across the dealer's hall, said, hey, everyone who's got a copy of Bad Medicine for Dr. Drugs, show it. And so like hundreds of people showed Bad Medicines, and Ken was like, oh my gosh, he's doing so well. But of course, they'd all just got free copies for which Ken would get 0 royalties. Anyway, that was a funny story that Ken still laughs out. Another player in our group was Charlie Crank. Now, Charlie Crank was the main production guy at Chaosium at the time. And in fact, later on, when the coup d'etat kicked Greg out, he's the guy that took over. Now, this picture is a newer picture of him, but he looked exactly the same in 1980s, except that his hair was black. So he did a lot of stuff. He wasn't really an author, but he produced all the stuff. He was like involved in every single thing that Chaosium ever did, you know, throughout its history, until he finally got ousted in a counter coup in 2018. Or 2017. And then there's this guy, Larry DiTilio. Now, at this time, Larry DiTilio was writing small-time stuff for various game companies. Everyone loved Larry. He was a great guy. More to the point, Larry had real talent. He did the most epic campaign ever for Call of Cthulhu, and I think the first box campaign, this was Master Nyarlathotep. Now, I wrote the first campaign, which was Shadows of Yog-Sothoth, but really that was just Shadows of Yog-Sothoth was just unlinked scenarios I kind of glued together to make a campaign, right? Masks of Nyarlathotep was the real deal. Things happened early in the adventure that made a difference later on, and so forth. It was like this amazing thing. Now, you can see on the box cover here that it lists Lynn Willis as an author, but it was actually Larry. Lynn was just an editor. But Mask was so big, we didn't actually put it all in the original box. We had to publish an extra adventure that Larry had written later on in Terror Australis. And Larry made it easy to do that because he was worried it was too big too. So he had the Terror Australis adventure not be tightly connected to the other adventures. Anyway, that's what we did. So later on, Larry decided that he was tired of being a freelancer and making basically nothing, working for game companies, and that he wanted to go to Hollywood. Well, he lived in Los Angeles. He went to Hollywood, and he started being a script writer for cartoons. He wrote the scripts for He-Man. He was on the first guys doing She-Ra. He wrote Transformers. He did the Ghostbusters cartoon. Incidentally, there's one of the Ghostbusters adventures is called Dairy Farm of the Living Dead. And the family that runs the farm are the Petersens, and that's a direct homage to me because he loved me. And he also wrote for the California Raisins, and he would often tell us stories about how stupid and terrible the censors and the business guys were at the cartoon companies. So in the California Raisins, at one point he wrote a joke where one of the Californians was mad at someone and called her that old prune, and the California Raisin Association, I kid you not, said, "You cannot have her call someone a prune because raisins are not prunes and we can't have them confused." Like anyone's going to be confused. Oh my God. Anyway, so later on, Larry actually became president of the Screenwriters Guild, and he wrote stories for all these cartoons. You knew about these cartoons even if you didn't watch them. He also scripted movies. He did Jason the Wheeled Warriors. He did tons of things. He was very prolific and creative, but he always loved games and role-playing games, especially, and he was my friend. Sadly, he passed away last year. Now, in 1980s, he was not a big wheel, though he came in later on. Oh, incidentally, remember the Hollywood writers' strike? During the strike, of course, Larry refused to write for Hollywood, so instead he went back to writing role-playing game stuff for Chaosium and other companies. Of course, it was still just a pittance, but he liked doing it and kept him busy. He was great. What a guy. So, and then we had a random guy. This is not actually what the random guy looked like. This is, just a face. There was another guy. So he showed up. He heard Larry and Ken and Charlie and me and Greg making plans to go play a game, and he kind of came over, and he was nice enough. But here's the thing. See, we all thought that he was the friend of someone else. Like I thought he might be Larry's friend. Larry thought he was Ken's friend. Ken thought he was Charlie's friend. Greg thought he was, no one actually knew him. He was just a random guy that attached himself to our party. And he knew he wasn't part of the group. And I think he figured out that everyone thought he was with someone else. So he kind of kept a low profile. So if you're the guy I'm talking about and you see me at some game convention, please stop and say hi. I'd love to know your name. Well done. So you got to play in the game with all these high-powered guys. I hope it didn't put you off Call of Cthulhu forever. So then we got ready for the game. We showed up in Greg's room. Oh boy, we're going to play. Greg had this whole adventure worked out. So we quick rolled up characters and we introduced each other. Now, I was playing Dagmar Rasmussen. If you don't know, Dagmar is a girl's name. I was a female. And I said, I'm the personal secretary to Charlie Crank's character. Now, Charlie had been, he'd been in the bar a little bit before I went to Charlie was not an alcoholic and is not an alcoholic, but he'd had a few beers, so he was a little buzzed. He was still willing to play, and he was capable, but what Charlie didn't realize is that my secret goal as Dagmar Rasmussen was to make Charlie's life hell. I didn't tell him that, though. As a side goal, I wanted to have my character wear high heels while we hiked through the mountain trails, because Greg had said the adventure was going to be in the mountains of Peru, in the high Andes, so I wanted to wear high heels, then have Charlie have to constantly rescue me. Of course, Charlie didn't realize that. Of course, Charlie was grateful that I was going to help him out. Eventually, he realized the awful truth, that I was there only to make him sad. So Ken Ralston was playing a private eye. So Greg, hoping to make the group kind of fit together better, asked, "Oh, Ken, so have you been hired by Charlie?" Because Charlie was a dilettante. And Ken said, no, I'm on my own separate trip to the Andes to uncover the truth. And he basically said, I'm going to get there before you, Charlie. You're not going to get anything done. He was not really a blood enemy, but not a friend. So he basically was a rival to our character. I don't remember what the random guy was. He really did keep a low profile. He said he was a friend of Charlie's character along for the ride. And Charlie thought, oh, okay, sure. So Larry shows up and he won't tell us what his guy's job was and said, my name's John Jones. So we're all suspicious of Larry's character. Anyway, and he told Greg what he was doing, but he didn't tell us. So the first step in any Call of Cthulhu game at a convention is you figure out how the PCs got together. So Greg says, something awful is happening in the mountains of Peru. And for reasons that'll become obvious, I don't remember anything about it. So we're all boarding a plane to Peru. It's the 1920s. Then Greg said, like any good game master, introduce each other and how do you happen to be here? So Charlie was pretty much the only real investigator in the group. And he was going off to Peru to solve the mystery along with the secretary, Dagmar, me, and his friend, the random guy that Charlie didn't know. So Ken said he'd independently heard about the something awful and had decided to come. Apparently there was some kind of possible treasure involved, or Ken thought pretended to think there was. I remember Ken had a great big suitcase, a huge trunk that he put in the back of the airplane. So Ken sits across the aisle from Charlie's character and he's glaring hatefully at him all the time because he doesn't want Charlie to get the treasure first. Then just before the plane takes off, Larry DiTilio's character comes running up panting, carrying another huge suitcase that he refused to put it on his lap. So after the plane takes off, Larry says, "Where's the plane going?" We said, "It's going to Cusco." "Where's Cusco?" "It's in Peru." "Where's Peru?" "South America." And he thought, okay, that might be far enough. So something's up with Larry. We don't know what. So as we made plans for our trip, we said, we're going to go in the mountains and get a guide. He overheard us talking about going to the mountains. He said, "I'm coming along," apparently because he wanted to get as far from civilization as possible with his suitcase. And he was not dressed for the mountains. He was wearing patent leather shoes and spats and a pinstripe suit. And he had a big diamond ring. He looked like a gangster. So at the airport, everyone wanted to take a cab to a hotel. And normally you just take a cab to the hotel, but no, we couldn't just take a cab. Charlie said, "I'll pay for the cab." But I said, "No, Charlie, I have all the money, so you won't lose it. So I'm carrying all your cash, you have none." He said, "What?" And then he said, "Well, will you pay for the cab?" I said, "I can't. I'm in the ladies' room fixing my hair." So he didn't have any money to pay for the cab. So Ken then starts haggling with the driver, but then Larry gets frustrated and says, "I'll take care of it." He reaches into the suitcase and pulls out a $50 bill and gives it to the driver and said, "Take us to the second best hotel in town." So we all look at him. He didn't even look. Does Larry have a suitcase full of cash? So at the hotel, things went fairly smoothly, except I made sure that Charlie was in a dingy, dim, windowless room in the basement. I said, "Oh, the damp air is better for you, Charlie, and your lungs in this mountain climate." So he got stuck in the worst room in the place. And we all went up we had a suite and we were like partying there, and Charlie was stuck in his basement. So now Ken, of course, Private Eye, he had a gun. And we suspected that Larry did too, because he looked so gangstery. And Charlie then says, "I own a gun," but I said, "Oh no, Charlie, I didn't pack your gun for you." So Charlie said, "Well, I want to buy a gun then. I need a gun if we're going to go in the mountains and fight cultists or something. I'll get the gun for Charlie, you just stay here." So I ordered him breakfast. I ordered roast guinea pig and sour milk, which is actually a drink which you can get. But I mean, I knew Charlie would hate it, but I didn't care. So, and then I went out with Ken to find a gun. However, instead of finding a gun, we went drinking the local liquor. My character Dagmar tried to hit on Ken's Private Eye, but I got rejected. Then we wandered around Cusco trying to find a mountain guide. Now, Ken had heard there was some kind of treasure in the mountains, and he wanted to get there before Charlie. I assured him that Charlie would let him have all the treasure, so I kind of did one good thing for Charlie. We eventually found a guide, and the guide said we could start into the mountains the next morning. So we basically wasted a whole day sneaking around, and then it looked already to go into the hills. Now you think Greg would be restive because we had made zero progress on his adventure, which was entirely up in the mountains. But he didn't care. He were entertained, I guess. He didn't have anything ready for Cusco. It was all the mountains, and we weren't even there. So when we started to get back to the hotel, I suddenly remembered about the gun. I said, "Hey, Ken, do you have a spare pistol?" He didn't. So I went to a gun store, which we assumed existed in Cusco in the 1920s, and I bought a single-barreled, single-shot shotgun from a store and took that back to Charlie. Of course, Charlie was not happy to see drunken Dagmar walking up with the least convenient gun you can imagine. Also, he was starving because he'd had no lunch. I'd taken all the cash with me and I'd been gone for 8 hours. I told him fasting was good for the soul. He threatened to fire me. So I told him that my 2 weeks notice meant he was stuck with me for the rest of the adventure anyway. He asked for some money, but I wouldn't give it to him anyway. So this is all my severance pay. So Charlie got mad at this point, and he threatened me with his new shotgun. Of course, it wasn't loaded because I hadn't, bought any shells for it, but he didn't know that. Meanwhile, Ken got excited by the ruckus, and he drew his pistol, aimed it at Charlie. Then the random guy decided, since he was supposed to be Charlie's friend, he should help Charlie. So he started threatening. I think he picked up a vase or something. So then Larry DiTilio, to keep things balanced, pulled a pistol out of a shoulder holster and joined my side. So there we are, 5 people, some holding guns, shouting at each other in the hotel lobby. The concierge calls the cops. They arrived pretty quickly and arrested us all and hauled us off to Peruvian prison. Larry said he needed to keep his suitcase, and he talked to Greg, and I can't remember his argument, but Greg got convinced and the cops let him keep his suitcase. I don't know how. Larry was very convincing. So now we're in prison. So I had my character Dagmar try to seduce the guard, but since Dagmar is like a frumpy middle-aged woman, I didn't really have much success. So then I got mad. I started yelling at the guards. While I was yelling at them, they all came over to make fun of me. Then Larry called them over and handed them each a $50 bill from his suitcase. They said, "Get me out of here." Well, the guards were super impressed and they let us all out. So we snuck out of prison with the help. Then Larry gave each of the guys another fistful of cash and we're out in the street. So at this point, we decided to disappear into the back streets of Cusco. Of course, Charlie had no idea of the layout of Cusco because all he'd done is sit around at the hotel. So I managed to work. I said, "Come with me, Charlie." And I worked him around in a circle back to the police station where he was spotted by the cops who were now looking for escaped prisoners. So they rearrested Charlie. Sadly, Charlie betrayed me and he pointed us out to the cops. So I got captured and the random friend were captured and all taken to a judge to explain ourselves. We actually managed to talk ourselves out of more jail time when we got released under orders to leave Cusco by the end of the day, which is no problem. We raced across town to the airport, but we were too late. You see, Larry and Ken hadn't been rearrested. They were on their own. And by this time, we were all certain that Larry had stolen the suitcase of money from the mob. We were almost right. We were a little bit like, why did Greg let this guy have a suitcase full of money? That's crazy talk. What kind of game master would do this? But wait for it. So we're down to just two stooges, Ken Ralston and Larry Detellios. They're the only guys who were free at the moment. We got free later on, but we were just racing to the airport. So Larry and Ken also went to the airport in the middle of the night. Their plan was to steal a plane. So Larry says to Ken, "Do you know how to fly a plane?" And Ken says, "Sure, how hard can it be? I watched the pilot on the trip down here." So they found a plane that actually had a pilot aboard and doing some kind of maintenance, and Larry pulled a gun. I have no idea how Larry kept coming up with guns, because he had a gun in the hotel, then it was taken away at the cops, but he had another gun somehow. Anyway, he told the pilot, "They're flying out of here and to get going." So the pilot said, "I got to gas up the airplane. I'll get the gas truck." So of course, instead of getting the gas truck, he just ran away, leaving Ken and Larry alone in the cargo plane. So Larry goes out and literally sticks his finger in the gas tank to see if it had enough fuel to take off. He figures it does, and he got back on board. Then he said, "Okay, Ken, start the engines. You said you can fly a plane." So Ken just sat there for a bit. Then Ken said, "I have a confession to make. I don't actually know how to fly a plane." So Larry's response is he aims his gun at Ken's head and says, "Fly the plane," as though the threat would enable Ken to succeed. Ken said, "Okay, sure. Just let me take the chocks away from the plane's wheels." So Larry let Ken leave to kick the chocks away, and he did, and then he ran away. Well, Larry fired at him, but missed. So meanwhile, the rest of us show up in a police car with a siren railing. So Larry panics and turns to Greg and says, "What's my chance to fly a plane?" And Greg said, "Well, I guess base chance 5%. Larry said, "Yeah, but I watched the pilot flying all the way down here. Does that increase my chances?" And Greg said, "Sure, I'll bump it up to 6. Larry said, "Terrific. Now," and here's an example of Larry arguing. "So I've heard it's a lot easier to take off than land, and all I'm doing is taking off, right?" And Greg said, "Sure, we'll double your chance, but you have to roll again when you land." Larry said, "No problem." See, now he's at 12%. That's how you negotiate with a game master. So Larry's plane is careening down the runway, being chased by the cop car, and the rest of the investigators are on foot running and shouting after him. Larry asks, "What's at the end of the runway?" And Greg says, "There's trees." So Larry starts rolling his D100. He rolls them like this, then he blows them for luck. Then he makes me blow on him because I'm the author of Call of Cthulhu. Then he made Charlie blow on him because Charlie was the only one of us that actually believed in luck. Greg and Ken refused to blow on the dice. I don't remember what the random guy did. So he rolls, and I guess all that luck had an effect because he rolls a 99, which if you played Call of Cthulhu, you'll know is not a good result. In fact, it's a fumble. So the plane sputters, then does a big bump on the ground. Didn't crash actually, but did a bump. At this point, Ken says, "Hey, remember that suitcase I brought on the plane that I never took off the plane?" And we all turned and looked at Ken. Then Ken says, "It was full of dynamite." And we all turned and looked at Larry. There's a huge explosion and burning $50 bills are blowing all over the city. So Larry says, "Oh, by the way, all that money was counterfeit." So of course, what genius. Of course, Greg didn't mind letting Larry have a suitcase of counterfeit money, right? So that's pretty much where the scenario ended. You'll note that, in fact, despite our highly experienced team, we never got anywhere near the area Greg had prepared the adventure. As I recall, the random guy a couple times tried to actually move us along in the scenario, but he failed. So that was the most high-powered game of Call of Cthulhu I ever played, with one of the players, everyone but the random guy, was a professional designer who'd actually done adventures for Call of Cthulhu. And I'd actually designed Call of Cthulhu. You'd think we could have done better. It's possible in retrospect, maybe so many design-heavy creative players kept us from getting anything done. So Greg and Larry are now sadly passed away. Ken Ralston has retired from doing design work, but I still see him at conventions. After Chaosium changed hands a couple years ago, Charlie is no longer on speaking terms with me, and I still like him, and I have no idea who the random guy was. So that was a thing that happened in the late 1980s.